While I switched glasses to be able to read my small prints, did realize that when I wrote that report, I didn't introduce myself. Took for granted that everyone would know me. Yes, I'm the former president of CAPE. I was called to participate in negotiations for all sorts of reasons. Une des raisons, par contre, pour laquelle
one of the reasons I was called upon to take part in bargaining is because my bargaining experience goes back to the 1970s. There are many in this room who weren't even born in the 70s, right? Unfortunately, I was. And I was already pretty old by then. But I'm not 100 years old. I'm not a vampire. An old crusty. So let's go back to my report. I don't want to really cause too many problems for the interpreters in the booth.
To report on the state of bargaining. But maybe before we talk about where things are at now, I think it's important to provide some context. We take for granted all sorts of things, like that you're supposed to know me, which isn't the case necessarily. CAPE is made up of three groups: ECs, TRs, and analysts at the Library of Parliament. So three different collective agreements bargained separately. And those agreements came to expiry in 2014. In fact, the TR agreement expired on April 18th, 2014, the LOP agreement on June 16th, 2014, and the EC agreement on June 21st. Dans le cas de la Bibliothèque du Parlement,
well, in the case of the Library of Parliament, which is a small group, the collective agreement is governed by different legislation. The employer is not Treasury Board, but Parliament. Our members have a collective agreement which is governed by arbitration. They still are eligible for arbitration. The salary increases that have been bargained will be 1.17, were 1.75 in 2014, 1.5 in 2015, and 1.5% in 2016. In comparison, the Treasury Board is currently offering public servants an increase of 0.5% a year for a 4-year collective agreement.
By the way, I just heard that they made an offer that was improved by 50% at 0.75%. Still for 4 years. We all know what the inflation rate was in 2014, 15, and we know part of 16 because we're getting close to the end of the year. So 0.75 is now the wonderful offer of the government. But let's get back to our history of the current round. We must remember that before the last federal election, the previous government was running a very aggressive anti-union and anti-public service campaign. The number of regressive bills was unprecedented. One of those, C4, deprived us from access to arbitration and changed the way bargaining would be done. That's one of the changes, a few of the changes. There were more than that. Our pension plan was, after that, changed by moving the employer-employee contribution rate ratio from 60-40 to 50-50. And that's not bargained for. We can't bargain pension. And new participants, and we've heard candidates talk about the two-tier system. New participants after January 1st, 2013 will only be eligible for retirement at 65, with early retirement at 60. Our sick leave system was the next target for this round. En outre, des rumeurs.
In addition, persistent rumors have shown the employer's intention to limit retroactivity to 12 months. You've heard it right. No matter the length of the bargaining process, a pay for retroactive wages will only go back 12 months. Given that prospect, we had to take prompt action. This is why we called on volunteers for bargaining teams, which the call for volunteers went out in 2013 so that we could prepare as far in advance as possible. And I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to tell you that there are members of the bargaining team that are here this evening. I'd like to thank them for their patience. I'd like to do that publicly because we've been working on this file for a long, long time, and they've been very patient, let me tell you.
Another important element is that under C4, the employer could now give notice to bargain to unions with a completely different set of rules. And the employer did serve notice to bargain to us under this new rule. Moreover, a new piece of legislation came into effect under which the government could impose its short-term disability plan without bargaining for it. Clearly, we were in for a rough ride. So the presidents of the federal public service unions were already meeting regularly, but they decided that we needed more than ever to be united and created a working group on bargaining and decided on a solidarity pact to protect our members from an abusive government who could use its legislative powers against its own employees. Also, we all remember in the previous round that we lost the accumulation of severance. That's something that the current leadership of PSAC would never want to be held responsible for again. Heureusement pour nous,
luckily for us, there's always hope. A federal election was scheduled for the fall 2015. And with a bit of strategizing and a bit of luck as well, bargaining would last until just before the elections. It wasn't surprising that the government, coming towards the end of its mandate, that it used anti-labor laws to impose a final offer. And our efforts finally paid off. Bargaining went on with many breaks right up until the election. And they weren't, these breaks weren't just because of us. And then after 10 years of conservative rule, the Liberals were finally voted into office.
Well-documented phenomenon that any new government will not rush back at the table when negotiations are interrupted by an election. The Liberals had made very specific promises. It was now time to deliver. Deliverology or something like that. But as we now know, this could prove to be long. Pour plusieurs d'entre vous, les présentes négociations.
For several of you, the ongoing negotiations seem to have lasted forever. As I was saying, for the members of the bargaining team, it's been a very, very long process. But believe me, for our bargaining teams, these are volunteers that were chosen several years ago, and the bargaining has been on for far too long for them. Some factors have arisen during their process at the TR and EC tables. The Treasury Board bargaining agents have changed for all sorts of reasons. Same thing for CAPE as well. Imagine I'm the third negotiator at the TR table, and I'm the fourth at the EC table as well.
Among the conditions to improve bargaining was the recalling of those anti-union legislations and introducing interim measures. We now have access to a pre-C4 type of arbitration called binding conciliation. If and when we come to an impasse, the rules have been reverted back to what was available before C4 became legislation. Il reste cependant.
However, there is an elephant in the room. There is an elephant in the room. The government's intent is to modernize the sick leave system. However, what was unacceptable for us under the Conservatives remains unacceptable under the Liberals as well. For CAPE, and like for the other unions as well, the system must be enshrined in a collective agreement. It must be equivalent or even an improvement on the current system as well. It must provide for full replacement of salary in the case of absence because of sickness. It must be managed internally. There's no question of creating a new problem with an external provider either.
When the parties are locking horns on any fundamental issue, you have to find a way to allow them to save face. We are getting closer and closer to that. And in the meantime, we're not making any progress on other priorities at the table. However, CAPE has tabled its pay proposal at the EC table, and will be doing so at the TR table. This usually signals to the employer that we're ready to give the final push. On a positive note, the employer has withdrawn its demand to limit retroactivity to 12 months. As I said, they've been showing positive signs, but it's not enough yet.
Before we can come to an agreement on wages, we're going to have to resolve the issue of sick leave. However, we can't forget that any future regime which is designed to protect employees who are absent from work for an accident or for sickness will apply to the whole public service, be it unionized employees or those who are excluded. Therefore, it's reasonable for the employer to find a universal solution. Among the possible solutions being looked at currently, there is an MOU put forward by the PSAC, our big brother, our big sister, and also a counter-proposal from the employer. Under these MOUs, and we can look at them, we can compare them, the parties would agree to create a committee to find an acceptable solution for everyone before the next round of bargaining. So during the life of the newly signed collective agreement, both documents are different on the conditions and the way of reaching those conditions. In the meantime, the banks and the current system will remain in place. That's essential, of course.
But an agreement at the table is still possible when we meet later this month for the EC group or in December for the TRs. We all have to be patient and hope that this government keeps its promises to negotiate in good faith with public service unions. For the moment, all the unions are facing the same problems, and no one is willing to be the first to throw in the towel. Let's give the process a final chance before we pull the plug. Et encore une fois, merci aux équipes.
Once again, I'd like to thank the bargaining teams for everything they've done. It's been a huge undertaking, so thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.